A massive manhunt is still underway for the terrorist or terrorists responsible for yesterday's horrific attack in central Berlin. A driver plowed through a crowded Christmas market, killing 12 and injuring nearly 50 others. ISIS has claimed responsibility. Today, German officials released the man they initially had in custody due to insufficient evidence. President-elect Donald Trump was quick to issue this response to the terror. He said, quote, ISIS and other Islamic terrorists continually slaughters Christians in their communities and places of worship as part of their global jihad. These terrorists and their regional and worldwide networks must be eradicated from the face of the earth. National security expert Dr. Sebastian Gorka has this warning for Americans.
The front line in this war is when you leave the house in the morning, whether you're going to a Christmas party in San Bernardino, whether you're going to a Christmas festival in Germany, or whether you're going to a Marine Corps fun run in New Jersey. This isn't World War I, this isn't World War II, it's not far away, it's not some trench in the middle of nowhere. It is right here in America and in Europe, and all Americans need to be aware.
KG, one of the other startling things is that President-elect Donald Trump used those words that the White House has failed to use for 8 years, Islamic terrorists.
Right. I mean, why, and what are we so afraid of? How are you going to fight terror if you actually can't even embrace and use the rhetoric in the right way and apply it to the exact terror that's being committed? And that's part of the problem here. There's been a disconnect, and it's been felt in our intelligence community, and it's been felt in the men and women that serve abroad that are in the theater working on this each and every day, and the special forces units and the operators that are there trying to make this happen. So this is something that it's very sad to see this, during the Christmas time, and the specific targets here of all the different aspects of what's gone on, and you see really just a drastic juxtaposition between President-elect Trump's approach and the approach for the past 8 years of Barack Obama's administration.
Dana, ISIS very quickly took responsibility for it. Do we believe this was an ISIS-inspired terrorist?
Well, I'll let the government tell us that, but I do think that ISIS is basically claiming responsibility for it, even if they didn't know. If there wasn't, because what we know from some of these terrorists that have struck in places when they were acting alone is that they were radicalized somehow online, and so then I think ISIS comes back on the back end. I don't think there are phone calls or direct reports saying go and do this at this particular Berlin market. What they've said is basically let yourselves go out there and be the terrorists that you can be wherever you are with whatever you can use at the time. In this case, it happened to be a truck. And beyond the rhetoric, I also think that the change that this next administration has the opportunity to do is to start a conversation with the Western civilized world and even in the region to say we have been avoiding dealing with the core radicalization aspect of the problem of ISIS. We have been trying to shrink their territory in Iraq and Syria, and to some extent I think they've been successful there. But those military solutions are not dealing with the core radicalization aspect, and until the world decides that we are going to do that and we're going to put resources and muscle behind it, I don't think this is going to stop, because you can use a weapon with anything that's around that is available to you to attack groups of people who are just gathering in order to go Christmas shopping.
NYPD stepping up their measures in New York, Chicago, L.A., 5 or 6 other cities said they're stepping up, warning their citizens to be careful in public
That's because they're, terrorists are, they have the luxury of all the time in their lifetimes to think of innovative ways to kill us. That's not just their hobby, that's actually their vocation. So this was a derivation of 9/11. Passenger hijacks plane, steers into building. Passenger or person hijacks truck, steers it into the market. So they just adjusted what they normally do, because they can't do what they did before. What's comically predictable in a lot of this stuff is people in the media seem still more concerned with retaliation than innocent civilians murdered. So you're seeing backlash take precedence over the bloodbath, people complaining about it. But we have to realize, and to your point about what do you do, terror isn't state versus state. It's progress versus death cult. So you have to realign your thinking. You're facing agents of destruction who believe that a worldwide apocalypse is preferable to being alive. It's all based on the idea of their heaven. So that's the core idea. That's the germ of this, the root cause. The root cause isn't American imperialism. It's the idea that if you do this act, you go to heaven and you have nirvana. We have to go after that idea and destroy that idea, and we destroy them.
Now, Juan, I noticed you were a little upset when I asked KG the question about the White House failing to use Islamic terror words together for the last 8 years.
It's a tired argument. I mean, it's like, you know, President Obama said, so, okay, let's use the language. Does that change any of the realities on the ground? Does that change our strategy? Does that put more people in the theater to fight Islamic terror? Answer, no.
But if your argument could be used in reverse, then do it. If the language has
no
an impact.
Because in reverse, what it does is it says, and this is exactly what not only President Obama, but you've seen Republicans say this as well. It would, in fact, then say to people in the larger Muslim world, this is a Western war against all of Islam.
I don't mind that, though. I don't care how people take our argument, because the fact is, they shouldn't be dictating how we think. So what if it helps ISIS? We're supposed to be killing ISIS.
No, we're not talking about helping ISIS. We're talking about who are we fighting?
Are we kicking off ISIS?
I mean, I'm saying no.
They don't seem to need
don't upset them.
I'm saying
assistance in that area.
They might.
That's not my point. In fact, if we could aggravate, irritate, elevate, get them out of here, ISIS, I'm all for it. The question is about the larger. Well, let me finish. So the question is about the larger Muslim world, which is a huge world, and actually we want their cooperation in fighting ISIS, and that's the Greg's point. There'd be
name that group that are the Islamic
nobody has
terrorists.
The question
Let
is
the rest of the greater group say those are the bad guys.
They are.
Right. Well, you got to name them then.
No, it doesn't. You don't have to. But anyway, I don't think this is the point. Allow me to make the point I think is on the table here today, which is I think that this is an argument over refugees. And I think
can we do that?
What, go right?
I'll let you do this because this is actually topical. There were initial reports that the market attack suspect was a refugee from Pakistan, but it's still not clear who's responsible for the massacre. Regardless, Europe has a deadly refugee crisis on its hands, and so could America if we keep admitting refugees from Muslim countries we cannot vet. The State Department, however, keeps downplaying the threat.
Before we start getting way ahead of ourselves on refugee policy, we need to let the investigation take its course. Look, here in the United States, we have been very, very careful about the vetting and the introduction of refugees into this country. Less than 1% of the refugees that we've taken in over the last 20 to 30 years have had to leave the country for some sort of violent behavior, whether it was extremism or not.
Now, some would push back on that, though.
Tell me.
I mean, a lot of people would push back on that the refugee program is not going to be a problem, isn't a problem, and is not going to be a problem.
Well, it hasn't been a problem so far. So the question is this. You see in Germany, where Merkel, by the way, is up for re-election, and what we heard today is the German far right, the populist right in Germany saying, these are Merkel's dead, right. which is like a blood libel. Oh, my God. You know, they're blaming Merkel for what happened yesterday. Now, we do know that the suspect was released, and he was a Pakistani who had just come in, I think, late last year. Yeah. We don't know what the real suspect is so far. And I think that's why we're right to be cautious and wait until the investigation takes place.
Can I bring Dana? I'm sorry, KG. Let me bring Dana. So Juan points out Angela Merkel, 760 or 780,000 of the 1.4 million refugees that Europe has taken in have gone through Germany.
Well, I think that is a conversation worth having, but it is not necessarily directly related to the case we're talking about in particular in regards to Berlin. So I think that Admiral Kirby was right to say, well, let's wait. I can agree that there might be problems with the vetting and the Syrian refugees, and we can agree with that. But until we know, because if they arrested the Pakistani, or they brought the Pakistani in and they realized, oh, wait, no, this isn't the right guy. What if you find out, like we did in Orlando, it's an American citizen who was self-radicalized? And that gets back to my point that until you deal with the core radicalization issue, you are basically doing, you know, that whole saying of this is exactly what ISIS wants? Mm-hmm. This conversation about what to call them and talking about Syrian refugees, this is what ISIS wants, because it prevents us from actually coming together to figure out a way to deal with radicalization on a wholesale basis.
Nobody wants to talk about what causes radicalization, though, because it affects all religions. You know, saying that there's a better place than this is what leads to that. By the way, the political ping pong that you see is The left will say it's anything but Islamic in origin, and the right will use it to justify anti-immigration policies. The problem is that you can be somewhere in the middle there. If maintaining your nation's security is, if anybody portrays maintaining your security as intolerant, that is a risk. It is not bigoted to want to have a safe country, to want to have strong borders, to want to have, quote, extreme vetting.
KG, ISIS has promised, has recommended, and by the way, people are listening to what they recommend, i.e. these
They're following through on it,
truck deaths.
on their literature and
they
online
said use the refugee program, infiltrate the refugee program.
Well, they told us that, but then sadly we don't want to take them for their word, and despite evidence, to the contrary, they're in fact doing it. They're doing what they say, despite people not wanting to believe that intelligence that we're getting. We saw it evidenced here, and the reason why the far right in Germany are upset is because of this open-door migrant policy, letting in since 2015 over 1 million migrants, and this is just juxtaposed to now what President-elect Trump is saying, which is, yes, let's do the extreme vetting, let's be compassionate, let's be humanitarian, but let's make certain who we are allowing in so we don't make it easier for terror to funnel directly through into our country.
And so my point when I brought this up was, look, this is an argument that's being now introduced into the American conversation about refugees. We're using the German incident. And the fact is there have been several incidents in Germany where they haven't had any mass attack, but they've had several incidents. Remember the incident at New Year's Eve where there were a group of refugees who harassed women, assaulted women.
Also crime.
Let me finish the point.
Terrorists, refugees from Syria that went through.
Yeah, but I'm talking about what happened in Germany in specific here. And what I'm saying is I think Americans, especially Americans who are opposed to the immigration policies of President Obama, and by the way, as KG pointed out, Germany has let in about 1 million. The United States, less than 10,000. And still you have people in the United States who say, oh, this is terrible. Front page of the New York Times this week, a wonderful story about a Syrian girl in Canada and all the support and normalization, how you would get people to assimilate. United States, we have money put in and we do vetting, but we don't have similar programs, and yet we say we are a beacon to the world. We will take in your tired, you're oppressed, and that's the best of America.
But now you're radicalized.
It is the best of America. However, this is a new world. The battlefield is Earth.
Right.
So we can't live in a bubble and think this is the same it was in the 1700s and 1800s.
No, but you know that people in World War II said the same thing about Jews, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yes. But it wasn't Americans who were saying that.
Yeah, we didn't let in the Holocaust, people fleeing the Holocaust.
Well, that was wrong.
Because we said they were a bunch of commies. We don't know who's coming in here.
But okay, now I realize how you screwed me up here. You were comparing victims of the Holocaust or people fleeing the Holocaust to radical extremists.
No. Most of the people fleeing Syria are not radical extremists.
Well, what we're trying to do is stop radical extremists.
And there, I'm with
you. But you're comparing that to me saying no to Jews.
No, I'm not.
But the problem is the vetting process. We don't know who some of these people are, Juan, because there aren't sufficient means to be able to identify and specify who should come. And you want to let the good people in.
And there are some of these refugees who have committed terror. We know that for a fact.
And there are also those who get here that are like maybe they're 9 and then they grow up to be self-radicalized, but that you could also do that to somebody who was born here in America. Like again, it gets to the point of like the crux of this issue is the radicalization, and that's what we don't end up actually addressing.
I'm being self-radicalized by Juan.
How in the world can you compare refugees who some have been radicalized to Holocaust survivors who are fleeing
extermination? No, he made a good point. I think that he made a good point, a historical point about arguments that are made about groups of refugees that over the years that have come through, that there are usually excuses that are made or points. Sometimes they're worthwhile.
But I don't think you can't compare the two because among the Jews fleeing, there weren't radical extremists.
I agree with that
flying planes into buildings.
But he was making a historical comparison that I think
it was incorrect.
You know it wasn't, and you should see what they said about the Irish and the Italians when they were coming in waves at the end of the 1800s. They said terrible things.
But now if you use that comparison, that's equality. We always make fun of our immigrants.
Okay.
We're going to leave it there. We have a 2-2 tie. KG, you want to break it?
Yeah.
Go to break it.